The chair across from me had been empty for nearly an hour. Not because the restaurant was quiet. In fact, it was one of the busiest afternoons of the summer. Families filled the tables near the windows. Friends laughed over plates of pasta. Couples sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing desserts and stories. Life seemed to be happening everywhere around me. Everywhere except at my table. I stared at the untouched second menu lying across from me and tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing inside my chest. The sunlight poured through the large glass windows, painting golden patterns across the wooden floor, but somehow the warmth never reached me. 3 weeks earlier, my fiancé had ended our relationship. 5 years together had disappeared in a single conversation. Since then, every day felt longer than the one before. Friends checked on me at first, but everyone eventually returned to their own busy lives. I couldn't blame them. Life moves forward whether your heart is ready or not. That afternoon was supposed to be our anniversary. I almost stayed home. Instead, I forced myself to come to the small lakeside restaurant where we had celebrated so many milestones. I thought maybe facing the memories would help me move on. It wasn't helping. Before we continue, if you believe kindness deserves a second chance and that small moments can change lives forever, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need them today. I looked down at my plate, wondering whether I should ask for the check and leave. That's when I noticed a woman standing near the entrance. She wasn't alone. A little girl stood beside her, holding her hand tightly. The woman looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted alone, but emotionally tired in a way that seemed much heavier. Her eyes moved around the crowded room searching for an empty table. There weren't any. The hostess spoke to her briefly and pointed toward the waiting area. The woman's shoulders dropped slightly. Then her eyes landed on my table. For a moment, she hesitated. A few seconds later, she slowly approached. The little girl stayed close beside her. When she reached my table, she offered a nervous smile and asked if they could sit there for a while until another table became available. Something about her expression caught me off guard. Maybe it was because she looked like someone carrying a burden she could no longer hide. Maybe it was because I understood that feeling. I nodded and told them they were welcome to sit. The little girl smiled first. The woman thanked me and carefully took the seat across from mine. For several minutes, none of us said much. The child colored on a paper menu while the woman occasionally checked her phone. Eventually, I noticed tears forming in her eyes. She quickly looked away. I pretended not to notice. Then the little girl quietly reached over and held her mother's hand. That simple gesture said everything. The woman took a deep breath. After a while, we started talking. Her name was Marin. Her daughter's name was Elsie. At first, the conversation stayed simple. Weather. Food. The crowded restaurant. But slowly, pieces of their story emerged. Earlier that morning, Marin had lost her job. Not only that, but she had recently gone through a difficult divorce. She was raising Elsie alone. The restaurant wasn't supposed to be a celebration. It was a promise. Months earlier, she had promised her daughter that no matter how difficult things became, they would still have one special lunch together before school started again. Even after losing her job that morning, she refused to break that promise. As she spoke, I could see how hard she was fighting to stay strong. Not for herself. For her daughter. Meanwhile, Elsie happily colored flowers and animals, completely unaware of how much courage her mother was showing. Listening to them shifted something inside me. For weeks, I had been trapped inside my own heartbreak. I had convinced myself my pain was the center of the world. But here sat someone carrying challenges far heavier than mine, still finding the strength to keep a promise to her child. When their table became available, the hostess approached. Marin thanked me again and prepared to leave. Before she could stand, I surprised myself. I asked the server to bring their meal to my bill. Marin immediately protested. I insisted. It wasn't charity. It was simply one person helping another. For the first time since arriving, her eyes softened. She accepted. They moved to their table. I expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. As I finished my meal, I noticed Elsie repeatedly looking in my direction. Eventually, she walked over carrying a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me and hurried back to her mother. Inside was a drawing. 3 people sat around a table beneath a bright yellow sun. Underneath, written in careful handwriting, were 6 simple words. Thank you for not eating alone. I stared at the drawing for a long time. Something inside me broke. And healed. At the same time. The loneliness I had carried into the restaurant suddenly felt different. Lighter. For weeks, I had focused on who left my life. That little drawing reminded me to notice who was still entering it. The months that followed weren't magically easy. Healing never works that way. But that afternoon became a turning point. I started volunteering at community events. I spent more time helping others. I reconnected with people I had unintentionally pushed away. Slowly, life expanded again. 1 year later, I attended a local fundraiser. As guests filled the event hall, I recognized a familiar face. Marin. She looked different. Stronger. Happier. Employed again. Confident. Beside her stood Elsie, now a little taller than before. The moment they saw me, they smiled. We spent the evening catching up. I learned that things had gradually improved for them. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But steadily. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, they had kept moving forward. Just like I had. Years later, the drawing still hangs framed on a wall in my home. Visitors often ask about it. Most assume it was created by a family member. In a way, they're right. Because family isn't always the people you're born with or even the people you plan to spend your life with. Sometimes family is the stranger who sits down at your table when you need company. Sometimes it's the child who unknowingly reminds you that kindness matters. Sometimes it's the unexpected connection that arrives precisely when you think you're completely alone. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can echo through someone's life for years. Special request, comment below with the words "Kindness changes everything" if you believe one small act can completely transform someone's day. Looking back now, I no longer remember what meal I ordered that afternoon. I don't remember the music playing in the restaurant or the exact weather outside. But I remember the empty chair. I remember a tired mother. I remember a little girl with crayons. And I remember the moment I realized that sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we spend years searching for. They're the strangers who walk into our lives on an ordinary sunny afternoon and quietly remind us that none of us were ever meant to carry our burdens alone. Because sometimes the most important dinner of your life begins with an empty chair, and ends with a reason to hope again.